Welcome to today's Explainer. We're diving right into one of the most legendary voyages in human history, Vasco da Gama's arrival in India. But hey, we aren't just going to sit here and recite the boring dates and facts you might remember from grade school. By the end of our time together today, I'm going to share a pretty shocking revelation about what he actually found when he finally stepped off that ship. It's a reality that literally flips the traditional historical narrative completely upside down. So I want you to keep this one central question in the back of your mind as we go through this. What actually happens when a desperate, starving sailor finally meets the absolute richest king in the world? That massive, jarring contrast between European desperation and this unimaginable Indian wealth is the true story of this encounter. But to really understand how we even get to that meeting, we first have to talk about the sheer, frantic desperation that forced these sailors out into the unknown in the first place. Section 1. Europe's Desperate Spice Quest. Okay, picture this. It's 15th century Europe, freezing, snow-covered winters. And on the dinner table, well, you definitely don't have the luxuries we have today. You're eating bland, dry, salt-cured meat, and honestly, sometimes meat that was literally starting to rot. To preserve this food and actually make it edible, Europeans desperately needed what they considered to be pure magic: spices. We're talking black pepper, cloves, cinnamon, and cardamom. But these obviously didn't grow in Europe. They came from this mysterious, faraway, almost fairy tale-like land known as India. So you're probably wondering, why didn't they just go buy them? Well, there was an enormous economic chokehold going on. Arab traders held a very strict monopoly on the spice routes for centuries. They'd buy the spices dirt cheap in India and then sell them for their literal weight in gold in European markets. And to make matters even worse, the massive Ottoman Empire acted like a giant brick wall, completely blocking the land routes. It was basically an ultimatum: pay the insane prices or keep eating your rotting, flavorless meat. The kings of Spain and Portugal were practically losing sleep over this. They decided, okay, if the land is blocked, we have to pierce the heart of the ocean to find India's door. Section 2. Surviving the Deadly Ocean. Let's look at the timeline here. 10 years earlier, an explorer named Bartholomew Diaz actually tried this route. He hit the southern tip of Africa, faced these terrifying waves, named it the Cape of Storms, and basically said nope and turned right back around. He valued his life over spices. Fast forward a decade, and King Manuel I of Portugal finds this incredibly stubborn, ruthless sailor named Vasco da Gama. On July 8, 1497, da Gama leaves Lisbon. But guys, this wasn't some big, happy send-off. The crowds on the docks were crying. They were mourning the sailors as if they were already dead, basically watching them march straight into the mouth of a monster. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the sheer, unimaginable horror these guys faced once they hit the open Atlantic. Keep in mind, people back then still thought the Earth might have a flat edge they could fall off of, or that literal sea monsters were going to swallow their ships whole. But the reality was actually worse. The ocean was throwing waves at them the size of 10-story buildings. And without fresh food, scurvy set in fast. We're talking gums bleeding, teeth literally falling out into their hands, bodies breaking out in blisters. The lower decks turned into floating hospitals and morgues. They were throwing bodies overboard every single day. Eventually, the terrified, dying crew completely snapped and mutinied. They just begged to go home. But Vasco da Gama, he wasn't your average captain. He was driven by absolute sheer obsession. He took all of his navigational instruments, threw them into the raging sea, and gave his men this chilling ultimatum: return to Portugal or make the ocean our grave. He gripped that ship's wheel, sailed right through the heart of the storm, and basically challenged nature itself. And miraculously, they actually survived the Cape of Storms and popped out into the Indian Ocean. But they had a massive problem. They had absolutely no idea where they were going. And that brings us to a fascinating turning point. When they finally dragged themselves into the East African port of Malindi, looking like absolute walking corpses, they realized they couldn't navigate this new ocean alone. It's here that da Gama meets an Indian sailor, and this navigator completely stunned the Portuguese with his absolute mastery of the stars, the monsoon winds, and the complicated ocean currents. The Portuguese quickly realized, oh wow, these locals are the true masters of the sea. So, guided by this Indian navigator, the monsoon winds finally filled their sails and gently pushed them toward their destination. Section 3. The Wealth of Calcut. After months of literal death, scurvy, and terror, they finally arrive. Just imagine being one of those sailors for a second. The sea is calm, the morning sun makes the water look like melted gold, and then a breeze hits them. It's not the smell of rotting wood or salt or death. It is, as they described it, a divine fragrance of sandalwood, cardamom, and pepper. It was May 20th, 1498. The mist clears, and they see these tall coconut trees, they hear temple bells ringing in the distance, and they're staring at this vibrant, bustling city. They had reached the western coast of India, Calicut, in modern-day Kerala. The sailors literally fell to their knees, weeping and kissing the dirt. But here is where the great historical shock happens, the big twist. The reality of what they found in India completely shattered their expectations. Da Gama probably thought he was going to discover some backward, isolated, uncharted land, right? Instead, he steps off his boat into one of the wealthiest cities on planet Earth. The port is already packed with diverse traders from all over the globe. Those spices that Europeans were trading solid gold for, they were just lying around like ordinary dirt in the markets here. There was abundant silk, gold, and precious gems everywhere you look. India didn't need to be discovered at all. It was already the undisputed king of global trade. Section 4, Needing King Zerin. And this brilliantly illustrates just how wild that first encounter really was. Just picture Vasco da Gama for a second. He's exhausted, unwashed, literally wearing ragged clothes after months at sea, and he's standing right in front of King Zamorin, who is sitting in a grand court of just unimaginable wealth, completely covered from head to toe in gold ornaments and diamonds. Da Gama tries to present these gifts to the king, but they're just cheap, unimpressive trinkets. They actually made the royal courtiers laugh out loud. Yet King Zamorin stayed perfectly calm. Operating on traditional Indian hospitality, he welcomed this ragged, desperate foreigner anyway and granted him permission to trade. So, you see, Da Gama wasn't some glorious conqueror arriving to claim land. He was essentially a desperate beggar standing in the court of a billionaire. Section 5, The Price of Discovery. So Da Gama spends months in Calicut loading his ships to the absolute brim with black pepper, cloves, and cinnamon. And when he finally navigates back to Portugal, the exact same people who had wept for his death are now cheering him like a god. Why? Well, because of this incredible number right here. Da Gama sold his cargo of spices for 64 times the cost of the entire expedition. 64 times! This mind-boggling profit margin sent absolute shockwaves through Europe. They knew they had finally found the golden ticket. But as you can probably guess, that 64x profit completely poisoned that initial hospitality. Greed took over. Every single European power wanted a piece of that pie. Step 1, those basic friendly trade agreements were suddenly being used as excuses to build armed fortresses. Step 2, the ships stopped bringing cheap trinkets and started rolling up with cannons and heavy weaponry. Step 3, this sparked a violent scramble for control among the Portuguese, the Dutch, the French, and eventually the British. And finally, Step 4, a land that was once a peaceful, welcoming center of global trade was violently shackled into centuries of colonization. The very country that had welcomed them as guests was, tragically, enslaved by them. But, as history always shows us, India isn't just a piece of land you can conquer. It is an enduring soul. Centuries of darkness and struggle followed that fateful arrival for sure, but the spirit of the land never broke. Fast forward to August 15, 1947. The Indian tricolor flag is finally raised, declaring independence. It proved, once and for all, that India could never truly be discovered, owned, or permanently subjugated by anyone just showing up on its shores. So, I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought today. We've been taught for centuries that Vasco da Gama discovered India, right? But when a desperate, starving, completely lost sailor has to be guided by an Indian navigator into the wealthiest, most bustling global trade hub on the entire planet, well, if India was already the undisputed center of global trade, who really discovered whom? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer today. I really hope this new perspective completely changes how you look at the history books.